What would happen if you found out that the only real fight you have in this lifetime is with yourself? Let's talk about that. Welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast. Today I'm joined by Phyllis Leavitt. Phyllis graduated from Antioch University with a master's degree in psychology and counseling in 1989 and has been on a spiritual journey for most of her life. Phyllis has published 2 books, A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire. It looks like 3 now, Phyllis, based on that cover, which we will talk about all of them. About her healing journey and the profound connection she made to divine source in the process. As a psychotherapist, Phyllis has treated children, families, couples, and individuals for 34 years and has worked extensively with abuse and dysfunctional family dynamics, their aftermath, and some of the most important elements for healing. Her latest book, America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis, focuses on bringing mental and emotional healing to our national awareness and social political agenda. Phyllis is particularly interested in the connection between psychological and spiritual health and well-being and growth, both personally and as a species. Phyllis lives with her husband in Taos, New Mexico, and is focused on writing and speaking. Welcome, Phyllis. So wonderful to have you.
Well, thank you so much for having me here to speak with you today. I'm excited to dive in to wherever you want to go.
I am too. You know, we talked a little bit before I hit record, and even just reading what I read as far as your introduction, I'm the moment I read it, I was like, we're going to have a great conversation. So I'm very excited because I feel like we align in many ways from the perspective of looking at life from that spiritual perspective.
Yeah, very much.
So in starting, normally what I do, and like we talked about before we hit record, nobody comes to wanting to live a spiritual way of life because everything is rosy and wonderful. And, you know, it can be difficult. Life can be difficult. And a lot of times, at least for me, that's what led me to want to figure out another way and see another way and find another way. And I didn't know anything about what that journey would look like, but I'm fortunate to have been led in so many ways to finding that over the years. And
yeah.
if you would be so kind as to share your journey, Phyllis, that would be wonderful. I think everyone would love to hear how you came to this way of life.
Well, thank you so much. And, you know, one of the things I had shared with you earlier too was, you know, reading other people's stories was helpful and inspiring to me for years and years and years, and still is. You know, I love to read people's personal stories of triumph over their great odds. And I have a life like that, like so many people, probably not that different from so many people, but I had some very significant early childhood trauma that was buried. It happened very young, and I did recover it later and remember, but when I was growing up, I had no idea that something deeply painful was affecting me from inside. And so my way of coping, people have different ways of coping. My way of coping was to be pretty shut down. And I read a lot. I loved school. I loved learning. I was really into writing, even at a young age. And I was very inward. And at the same time, and I feel really blessed because at the very same time, I was just blessed to have these incredible breakthrough experiences that just came out of nowhere. Not very many, but they were really significant. And experiences of a really divine presence coming and infusing my being and giving me the experience of what a love was that was way beyond human. And so those were the light in the darkness. And my first book that I wrote about the beginning of my healing journey is called A Light in the Darkness, because that's kind of what my life was like. It felt dark, and there were these moments of profound opening. One of them came when I wrote the very first poem that I wrote. And I think that was the indication for me that I was supposed to write in this life. And I kind of always knew that. It was just got born that way. And a lot of the other experiences that I had that were of this sort of being just enveloped in divine love happened in nature, where I had a profound connection to the earth being. And so I was blessed in that way. I think I maybe was just born looking for a spiritual path, and because the light and the darkness, it lit up the darkness, and I think that's a lot of what light does. It's like what is it we can't see? What is it that hurts, that needs to be healed? So a lot of it was that. Um, and I joined a spiritual group when I was young. I met my first husband there. I had 3 children, and basically my life just fell apart. I think all of the early childhood trauma was starting to surface, and I just was kind of at a rock bottom place. I was also in a very dysfunctional relationship. My marriage was not healthy, um, and I went to therapy for the first time. And it was amazing, to understand that my early conditioning had so much to do with the coping mechanisms that I had developed, the attractions that I had, the repulsions I had, the things that I felt called to, and the beliefs that I had about myself and other people that were not helpful. So, I began a long journey of opening up what had happened to me and healing from some really significant trauma in early life. Um, and it kind of like what I was saying, my early life was like with this darkness and these flashes of light. I was keeping a journal, and I thought, if I ever make it through this darkness, I want to share my story.
Mm.
I actually didn't believe that I would, honestly. And I've had so many clients who come that way who really don't think there's any hope, but obviously some part of them does have hope or they wouldn't try. And I was kind of like that. Um, and for some reason, I was just willing to go down even deeper into that darkness. And one day in 1994, I was writing in my journal, as I did quite often. And I said to God, makes me teary even to remember so long ago, I give up. I can't do this. Um, and I started to hear these messages from the most loving, profound divine source, and I just wrote them. Um, and that's the first 2 books that I wrote, A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire, are the beginning of those messages. I have many, many more that I still haven't written out. But basically, what the divine was telling me was what my soul was doing here in this life experience of Phyllis. And that my pain and my feelings of being stuck and being blocked, and not being able to either give or receive the love that I really wanted in this life, were not because I was a flawed person. It was kind of like what I took on to undo. And so I got all these messages about what our souls are doing here in human form. What are the laws that govern the ego consciousness that we live in? What are the kinds of practices? I learned all about the chakras and meditations. And this was all given to me, about how to start to undo the trance of our personality and our ego functioning in this kind of separate, um, and divided kind of existence that we live in from ourselves and from other people and from the planet. So that's kind of the beginning in a nutshell. And then just to catch up with my most present book, I had the idea, I became a therapist out of having gone to therapy. That was why I became a therapist. It was so helpful to get the psychological piece. And I felt like that was kind of missing from my spiritual practice because I didn't understand myself. I didn't understand the pain that I was living in. And I needed to heal some of that to actually be able to embrace my spiritual life in a different way. But they really coincided. I don't think I can really take them apart, because spirit spoke to me about my psychology. So, you know, um, so the present book was, I had this idea for a long time. If my trauma affected me so deeply, and it did, um, what's happening to the human race? with all the trauma that we inflict on each other that most people have no chance to recover from or heal from or even have any idea of how it's affecting them. How can I bring that to a conversation? How can I bring what I've learned on an individual level from my own journey, from working with hundreds of people, into a broader political, social, cultural, national conversation for our mutual healing? Because I think so much of what has been going on in human history, and certainly what's going on today, is such a reflection of our declining mental health. And I think we really need a lot of help to recover as individuals, as communities, as a nation, and as a species, really, if we're going to survive here. Because our ability to take ourselves out has really skyrocketed in the last several generations. So that's where America in Therapy came from. And I will say, just to add this one last piece, that I had the idea and I had written a lot about it just in, different places in my computer. I had written a chapter here and a chapter there, and was exploring what I wanted to say. But it wasn't until one day when I sat down and I was like very deep in meditation that I actually heard, write this book. And so again, those two worlds are very, very connected for me. We're here to help each other is what one of the big messages I've gotten from the divine. We're not here for our own personal ascension alone. We're really here to help the whole, all of our brother and sister human beings find their way home to their spiritual essence and love.
Couldn't agree more, Phyllis. I think that's absolutely true. And one of the things that I've tried to carry with me over the years is, because I did the same thing with books. It was probably a 20-year period. I plunked down 3 paragraphs, and then all of a sudden 2 books came out of me,
Mm-hmm.
which was a pretty cool thing. And it lined up, it lined up, and it was so, once I started, it was just so natural to write and to get it out and to continue to allow that to sort of pour out of me. And it felt otherworldly sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
There was a part of it where, okay, I'm doing a little thinking, but most of it was, it's just coming out. Here it comes, here it comes, here it comes.
Right.
And that was a wonderful experience for me. I've outlined about 75% of book 3, but I'm not quite,
Wow.
I don't feel ready to write it yet. So
Mm-hmm.
once I'm moved to do that, and I don't know when that'll happen, once I'm moved to do that, it'll just happen. So one thing that you brought up, I thought was, and thank you for sharing your story, because it's so crucial. It's so crucial from a relatability perspective. And like you said, I've had so many people help me, whether it was from books or, I used to drive around with or audio cassettes and listen to, Deepak Chopra and Earl Nightingale and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But all of that fed me.
Right.
And it was immensely useful. You mentioned I give up, and that hits me, because I do feel there's a point where in order to go, maybe our trajectory is going like this, but in order to go like this, we need to surrender. I'm a
Right.
big fan of that. Do you feel the same way?
Oh, 100%. Because before that happened, a couple of months before I had the actual experience of this divine writing beginning to, come through me, I was in, tons of different healing modalities and just, doing my best to try to heal. I had begun to remember what happened to me as a very young child, but I wasn't getting better. I had panic attacks. I just was just sort of living on a thread, and trying
Mm.
to function. I had three little kids at that point, and I was a single mom by that point. And so I was just doing everything I could to function in the world and try to also do the healing work. So, in a session that I was in 3 months prior to the writing started, I had this unbelievable divine visitation come to me in the session. And my whole body was just filled with white light. And I was this vibration of love, physical vibration of love was rippling around my entire body and through my body. And the words that were spoken were about surrender. That was the first thing that was said. It was surrender it all, be with what is. Kind of, and it was magical. And it wasn't until a couple of months later then that source actually became a regular part of my life. So
Mm.
surrender, absolutely. And I'll tell you a quick story that really informed my life. Um, Even before that experience, when early on, when I was in the spiritual group that I was in, I had a friend that went to India and kind of found his guru. And at the time, I don't know if you are young enough or old old enough to remember this, but contact lenses at that time were made out of glass. And my
Mm.
friend had contact lenses, and he was on a very dusty train in India seeking his guru. And by the time he got to the guru, so much dust had gotten behind his lenses that his eyes were all inflamed, and he was in excruciating pain.
Mm.
And he sat before the guru and, kind of told him what had happened. And the guru's words to him, and I've never forgotten the story that he shared with me, were, don't fight it, be with it, just be with it. Fighting makes it worse. And I had never forgotten that. And that was something that was already starting to inform my life of like, how do I be with this level of pain? Um, because I think being with it isn't enough. I think we have to have something to do with it. So what my guidance gave me was how to begin to transform the pain of my psychological life, my emotional life, my history. And I did also have some undiagnosed physical pain at that time. How to begin to transform that. Surrender for me was a teaching about absolutely accepting and being with what is, and then working to use the energy of that pain or that distress to build a greater and greater connection to my spiritual life.
That's beautiful. And I was telling you I have a little injury, currently,
Mhm,
and I was
mhm.
thinking, and as I was sort of moving through this, and as it was moving through me, I was, practicing that, just allowing it to be, as opposed to fighting it.
Right,
And my books, right? When I stopped fighting,
right.
and I know I told you that little story about a mentor of mine said, Daryl, when you stop fighting, the fighting stops, which is exactly what the guru was telling the your friend in
Yeah,
India, which is
exactly.
which is a pretty cool thing. And I think we're brought up. I know I was brought up, but I think it's part of the, America and therapy. We're taught to fight everything. We're taught
That's
no
right.
pain, no gain. We're taught fight disease. We're taught fight, 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 wrestle, fight. And I just my entire life, at least for the last 40 or so years, has been unraveling the fight and and
Yeah,
and surrendering, and not just surrendering once, but surrendering
right.
as many times as it takes, right?
Absolutely. It's not a one-time thing. It's definitely not a one-time thing. It's over and over and over again. And I love the title of your book and of your message, When I Stop
Thank
Fighting,
you.
the Fighting Stops, because that's true internally and in our own lives and in our own relationships. And it can also be true for a country. And that's part of what I really wanted to say in America in Therapy is that there is only one way out of this, and it's a commitment to peace. And then how do we find it? What are the things we have to begin to embody or enact or develop in ourselves that could have us be so committed to peace that we're willing to do the work on ourselves and on ourselves as communities and as a nation to make that a reality. And it may sound Pollyanna-ish to a lot of people, but like, well, it's just not going to happen in this world. We are not only committed to fighting, but we're committed to winning. We live in a
Mhm.
win-lose paradigm. And when
Mhm.
you live in a win-lose paradigm, that means somebody has to lose. And the people who lose become symptomatic. And they eventually become the fighters often,
Right.
or die in the process. And so the cycle just keeps repeating. And the world of psychology really understands how this cycle repeats and what the after effects are. And I write about that in great detail in my book so that it could be common knowledge that if we hurt people, they become symptomatic. The school shooter didn't become a school shooter because they had a happy, loving, safe environment that they grew up in where they had what they needed and they were respected and they learned good limits and boundaries and they felt valued. That's not the school shooter. The school shooter is a really hurting, angry, disaffected, alienated human being who is taking out their rage on innocent people the way they were an innocent person that received something that was toxic for their emotional well-being. And I think we still don't know that totally. I think we're beginning to know it, that inside the perpetrator is a victim. But I don't think as a society we have really embraced that to the place where we would say, how do we stop victimizing people? If we really don't want to breed another generation of perpetrators, how do we stop the victimization? How do we treat people? How do we help them? How do we hear them? How do we listen to their symptoms as a cry for help rather than as a sign that they're bad people and we should just lock them up and throw away the key? And anyway, I could go on and on about that.
Right. No, that's great. I love that sort of weaving through that thought process because my mantra or one of my mantras in this life is my job, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Phyllis. My job is to be the best human being I can be for this planet and for other people. But it starts by being the best person I can be for me because in the process of being the best person I can be for me, I can learn to forget about myself and I don't have to worry about me and I can do my daily practices and I go about my life with a smile on my face and peace in my heart and all of those things. And so how do we make that happen one person at a time? Because I believe
Mhm.
it's a one person at a time thing, and then
Yeah.
it grows from there. Do you feel that way as well?
I feel two things. I definitely feel that. I mean, I feel like it starts with our own individual commitment to be the best people that we can be. And in the process, I know for me, it's an ongoing process of just continuing to heal the parts of me that are unconscious or that were wounded, that can be activated, that can get hurt, that can shut down, that can whatever. So I think part of being the best person for me is actually getting the help that I sometimes need, and I think, I think there's more acceptance of that in the culture that we live in, but I think we need a lot more. That to ask for help, to go for help, is a sign of strength and not a sign of failure or weakness. And I think we still have to reverse that whole paradigm of the courage it takes to go deep down into what hurt you or what's not functional in your life, or look at the ways that we've hurt other people. None of us has come out of our own pain scot free in terms of the way we've treated other people, unintentionally for the most part, I think, for many people. But that takes courage to look at how we are being with other people. And certainly it would take enormous courage for us as a nation to look at how we're being to ourselves and to people around the world, and to really own that and take responsibility for it, which are all the things that healing does. When you find that love for yourself, when you get out of the fight with yourself, as using your words, which I love, it opens up a space of compassion and deep understanding for the pain that other people manifest, which makes us much more likely to be able to be of some kind of service.
Right, right, absolutely. And there was a while you mentioned vulnerability, and I think that place has so much power in it. And growing up where I grew up, Midwest, my dad was a mechanic, Korean War veteran, all that sort of stuff. Pretty tough dude. My mom was tough, and that's how I grew up. And so I grew up with that, vulnerable. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
We
yeah,
don't talk about these things, and dad, we don't cry. And I think I was shaking my dad's hand by the time I was 10 or something, and not hugging or anything like that. So,
wow,
that was from whence I came, but I've since learned, and I think vulnerability ties in with humility because it humility is to me is being teachable. To me, it's
right,
it's saying, you know what, I don't know.
right,
Somebody show me, or something show me. I give up, I surrender, I'm all set. And then the vulnerability can spring from that because we understand that we don't know. That's
right,
sort of my feeling on it. And but it takes sometimes it takes a real look inside. It takes I have to be sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I think that comes for a lot of people, but for a lot of people, I don't know if that shows up. So how do we gather everybody in this quest, right? How do we look at life with the intention of healing, and can we show others that can be their intention? Because a lot of people, I feel like, aren't
right.
really that interested in it.
And scared of it. I mean, I think
Yeah.
a lot of the lack of interest actually covers fear,
Mhm.
whether it's conscious or not. And a couple of things that I would say are the very best therapy that I know makes it safe to be vulnerable. Many people grew up, myself included, like you for different reasons, but my family never talked about feelings. I never saw either of my parents cry. If they were upset, they were more angry. They might have been
Right.
really upset, but it came out as anger or impatience or ignoring you or whatever. Um, so I grew up the same way. Like nobody was vulnerable. And it was terrifying to me to to show my feelings, and I did believe it was a sign of weakness. And it wasn't until I was able to be part of it was being in therapy, and part of it was being with a couple of other people who were able to be vulnerable. But therapy was the first place where I felt not judged for having my feelings. And I
Mhm.
can't tell you how powerful that is to be in the presence of another person who embraces your vulnerability, who lauds your vulnerability, who is interested in what might be uncovered in your vulnerability, because we don't give that to each other in general in our society. We're supposed to buck up and be strong and, not need anybody and be our self made person or whatever. I think those are still a lot of the cultural norms that we grow up with, consciously or unconsciously. And I can share with you. So that's one of it. One thing is to find people who actually embrace that and then make it safe for us to have that level of vulnerability. And the other thing is to be that, to become that, and to share that in the space. Um, because if one person allows themselves to be vulnerable and they have their, they can hold their center in that in some way, then it gives permission to the people around them. And I was at a family function many years ago and many of the family members at that time were very kind of conservative, feelings held close to the chest, not a lot of emotional sharing or any. And we were around a big table, and we were going around, we were celebrating somebody's 90th birthday. So we were going around the table to acknowledge that person and share a little bit. And the first couple of shares were very, unemotional,
Mhm.
very, very flat, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
And my daughter, who's a master of vulnerability at this point in her life at times, um, just decided to go next, even though she wasn't the next person at the table. And she shared very vulnerably about what was going on in her life. And it changed the entire room.
Mhm.
Everybody began to share vulnerably. And some of the family members even said, "We don't do this in our family." And they did. And it was
Wow.
magical. The feeling of connection and love that got generated in the room for our humanity and our fallibility and our ability to own, what was going on and share deeply. And many, many people had tears, was phenomenal. So we can do that for each other. And even if nobody responds, it's still okay. Because if it's my mission to put that out into the world, then I did it.
You planted the seed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's beautiful. It's funny. My wife listens to all of these podcasts. She's going to get a kick out of this one when I say what I'm about to say. We had Thanksgiving this past year, and we had a nice group of people, and part of our family and my wife's family, and there's some folks that aren't terribly interested in emotion or feeling and or vulnerability or anything like that. And there's others who are, and there's others who I think are just kind of undecided, whatever. And so without naming names, but every year we go around the table and we talk about what we're grateful for, and it got deep, man. It was like
Mm,
people were just starting to share, and people were starting to cry, and people were starting to tell each other how grateful they were for
right.
other people sitting at the table. And we've had that happen a few times over Thanksgivings over the years, but I swear this year there wasn't a dry eye in the room. It was and not everybody was willing to share and be vulnerable and as
Right.
open as others, but everybody was definitely affected, which is a really cool thing because I'm a big fan of planting those seeds, right?
Yeah.
Just a little seed and I'm not in charge of when it germinates or sprouts or grows
Right.
or anything like that, but the universe is, God is,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and that's okay. But I'm in charge of planting the seeds, as much as I can. So thank you for sharing that because I don't think about that Thanksgiving often, but it was as soon as you mentioned that, I was like, wow, that's
Yeah.
right. That happened to
Yeah.
us.
And I'm at a place in my life where if I can't be vulnerable, it's uncomfortable. And I don't mean, 24/7 or in every circumstance or in every conversation, but I love to be with people where that's a shared value so that I know it's safe and wanted and actually, really wanted for us both to drop into that space when it's appropriate. And when I feel like there's a closed door, it's not as comfortable for me in relationship. I'll still love you, but I can't be my full self.
Right. I had a mentor of mine say to me a long time ago when I started on this path, and I started when I was 19, and it was basically what he said was, "It's a lonely ride, man. It can be a lonely ride, not from the perspective of feeling like a victim or anything like that. It's just there aren't as many people as we might think
Right,
who will embrace such a path and such a way of life. Have you
right.
found that to be true?
Oh, I definitely find that to be true. And I'm heartened by, and definitely, and I think that's what we're suffering from in our society. Because if you can't be vulnerable, you really can't own your stuff. You can't, you have to defend. And that's what we're suffering from, is this attack, defend on whatever level, to conceal our vulnerability, to conceal. And part of our vulnerability is that we actually need each other. We need each other to survive here. We couldn't, I couldn't have anything that I'm sitting here talking to you on my computer, and my electricity and the water in my faucet and the food on my table, if it weren't for thousands and millions of people that I will never meet. And we
Mhm.
forget that because we have such a value on our independence. So part of vulnerability is that big picture of, we need each other all over the world to be safe and to be constructive and cooperative with us. But in our lives, we come into this world wired for love and connection, and we become symptomatic to the extent that we don't have safe connection and love in our lives. And I've never seen that not be the case with the hundreds of people I've worked with or myself. And so we really need to, part of our vulnerability is, I do need you. Not like I need you for my 2-year-old self, but I need you for my adult self. I want relationship. I want to be able to love you. I want my love to be received as much as I want to feel loved or cared for or respected or included or whatever. And that's part of being vulnerable.
It is. It most certainly is. And I think there's that can be difficult sometimes because many people aren't really open to it. They aren't
Right.
willing to either love or, give love or receive love. And I have certainly over the years, and I quit quite a while ago, but trying to get people on board. And some people just aren't ready. And I feel
Right.
like that's, maybe I'm wrong. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Phyllis, but I feel like that's wherever their soul is in their evolution. Maybe it's the next time they come around, or,
Mm-hmm.
like that sort of thing. They're just not ready to move into that place, or start to move into that place. And that's completely okay. But I can't bang my head against the wall trying to get them to.
I
Um,
agree.
I think that's
I don't think
crucial, right?
banging, right. I totally agree. I don't, I wouldn't, I mean, I agree with you. Banging your head against a wall to try to get somebody to see it a different way or feel differently or open up or whatever usually doesn't work, because they experience you as trying to break down their defenses.
Right.
Um, so a couple things. One is, you know, I really try to focus on the people where there is some receptivity. Like, do it where it can do the most good. Um, but also, that's why I would imagine that's why you wrote your book. It's why I wrote, or your books. That's why I've written mine, because you don't know who you can reach.
Right.
Um, and so, maybe somebody wasn't open 10 years ago, but they happened to find your book, and all of a sudden it speaks to them. And you might never know, but you shared what really was in your heart and your soul to share, because you knew it was of value, or you hoped it was of value. And it may or may not get picked up. But I think education is really a very important thing. I would love to see psychology, for instance, and group dynamics, and all the things that have to do with a healthy family and an unhealthy family system be taught in our schools. Teach
Mm.
teenagers about intimate relationship and what works and what doesn't, and how your wounds might show up and how you might be able to heal some of that and bring that healing to your relationship or your parenting, so that we don't just keep passing this stuff on, one generation to another. I think education is really important. I'd be nowhere without the education that I received, formal in school, reading books, listening to people, exposure to something outside of my own mindset, which was extremely limited when I was growing up.
Right. Right. Me too. I mean, I was introduced to, and I say this a lot, but it's true, and I think it plays in all of our lives. Here's your box of stuff that you're supposed to believe, and here's your box of stuff that you're allowed to believe,
Mm,
and don't go outside of that, because this brings up another topic, you might go to hell.
Right.
Like that sort of thing, right? And
Mhm.
that I have what I was thinking about when you were speaking, or what was coming to me is we're so conditioned to only look at what's outside of us, you know, money and success and competitiveness. And believe me, I've run the gamut on all that sort of stuff. And I'm, you know, my wife would still say, Daryl, you're a pretty competitive dude, but I compete with myself now as opposed to competing with other people.
Right.
Um, but there is a there is a this life seems to be geared toward, and it has to do with social media, it has to do with everything. Something outside me is going to make me happy. Something outside me is going to take me to the promised land where I want to go. And that's exactly, I think, opposite of where I need to turn my attention, which is inside me,
Right.
and what's going on in there. And that's a difficult place to go sometimes, unless we've gotten to the point where we say, I give up. And then we start to get shown, right?
I mean, I really agree with you. And I think that's really what our ego consciousness is all about. And one little piece I'll share with you, because a lot of what, or some of what I received from the guidance that I got was about duality. And one of the big dualities that we live in is more and less. And we are just all about, in that level of consciousness, we're all about more. And that's just part of living in our ego consciousness. And I think what you're saying is you have to become aware of that to choose something different, because in some ways the whole more or less duality that we live in, constantly fighting for more, whether it's more wealth or more acquisition or more sex or more love or more power or more influence or more righteousness, or all the things people want more of, just it's like an addiction. It becomes an addiction. And when people are caught in an addiction, they don't necessarily know that they are, because it just has a life of its own. And so stepping outside of that and turning within, is the access to being actually able to make a choice. Do I really need to pursue more of that? Do I want to compete on that level? Do I need more money? Do I need more power? What am I doing with it?
Right.
Um, but the other part of going within, I would just say, is that, and this I think relates to what you said about surrender, when you give up, when it really isn't working, is when many people, for instance, turn to therapy, when they're really in pain, when that striving for more this, more that, or not being able to get it or whatever doesn't work, and they're in so much pain. Then there's often an openness to go within and find the roots of our dysfunction, rather than keep striving in the outer world. And that's my hope for America. That's my hope for all of us as human beings. When is it going to be enough pain that we actually say, let's put ourselves collectively into therapy? And who can hold that space for us? It's going to be a massive joint effort, right?
Right. Yeah, it is. And it's so it's so heartening to see people who want to embrace this this sort of life, and who are okay with giving up and okay with being vulnerable, or at least moving in that direction.
Yeah,
And it's really hard to watch people bickering all the time and fighting all the time, and whatever it is, whether it's in real life or social media, or, I'm not around any of that stuff in terms of in my life, and I'm not a big news guy either, because I just think that stuff is it's got dynamite. It's got dynamite that's going to blow me up
right,
um, if I get embroiled in that sort of thing. So that brings up for me the value, and you mentioned something about meditation earlier, but one of the things that I had to move toward, um, because we grew up with not not a lot of money or anything like that, and so I wanted to make some when I got out into the world and I got sober, and I'm like, all right, let's go. And but then I found out that that doesn't make me happy,
Hmm.
and along that journey that I had to find out how to find some quiet and some peace and some tranquility, something in here that just slowed it all down or allowed it to slow down. And that's what, breath work and meditation has done for me. And it sounds like I think that's one of the things that's incredibly necessary for us to heal is we
I
have
agree.
to find quiet, right?
I totally agree with that. And, meditation has become a very important and big part of my life. But I'll share this with you because I think it might be true for other people as well. I was completely unable to meditate when I was in my 20s. And the reason why is because that quiet frightened me. When I was really quiet, and I remember being in well, I was probably in my 30s at this point, but I was in a meditation hall of one of the spiritual teachers that I had sought out, um, and all of the pain would come up, all of some kind of part of what was buried that needed to be healed would come up in a quiet space. And I think that's why that kind of silence or meditation or turning within is actually frightening to people, and they don't want to do it because that's really the way it was for me. I had to go do some therapy before meditation really took hold in my life because then the quiet was welcome. Then and if other stuff came in, I could work with it. I knew what I was doing. But when I was young and I had no access to any other kind of healing, it was overwhelming for me to experience that quiet. And I wanted to share that because I don't think that's uncommon. So when people, turn away from meditation, it might not even be because they don't have a spiritual longing or it would be helpful, but because they just don't know how to manage what it would bring up.
Mm. I think would say the exact same thing happened to me, and it wasn't necessarily I couldn't find the quiet. I couldn't be
Yeah,
still. And I read, Thich Nhat Hanh and John Kabat-Zinn and, all the sort of how do you meditate books, right? And
right,
didn't help.
right, right.
It was just, it was I feel like it was when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I went on Deepak Chopra's website and I looked for somebody to help teach me meditation, and I found a guy who's now just a wonderful friend of mine, and he taught me primordial sound meditation, which includes a mantra, and it's just this beautiful thing. And that really kind of got me going. And I've said to him, his name is Amit, and I said, Amit, at this point in my life, it's like oxygen. I can't do
Mm,
without it,
right,
in
right,
terms of just
right.
helping me. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We don't have a ton of time left. I think we could talk for 2 hours or 3 hours or
Yeah.
four, but so something that's been interesting to me, and I just wanted to get your take because I feel like there's religion, there's spirituality, there's psychotherapy. There's these sort of pillars that, and people, some people have the religion and that's all. Some people have religion and psychotherapy, or psychotherapy and spirituality, or whatever, some combination of these things. I'd love to hear your take on how you believe all these things can interact
Mhm.
or help each other, or sometimes maybe what I found in my life, religion and spirituality were two very different things, and I needed to jettison some of the religion stuff so I could be open to the spirituality.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm not an expert in religion. I grew up Jewish and, we went to temple. I read Bible stories. I sang some of the songs in Hebrew. Um, but I never learned anything that had to do with the God within.
Mm.
God was out there. God was, something you were supposed to worship or listen to what was said in the Bible, or, that kind of thing. And it just had no appeal to me. I felt like culturally, I was Jewish, but I had no interest in the religion because it didn't feed anything in me. Just to say I'm Jewish didn't mean anything to me. um, so I'm not saying that's true for all people of my faith, but that was my experience, and I think I was desperately looking for something that I could actually experience within myself, and I think that might be the difference between some religious structures and some spiritual practices. That many spiritual practices are about awakening something within yourself that is connected to the divine, that's connected to your own soul, that it's your experience, and you're not relying on somebody else to tell you what to do or how, or who you should be or what rules to follow. And I think this is where psychology really ties in. We also take our wounds with us into spirituality and religion. So, a person who's really been traumatized in their home, and was treated with rigidity or cruelty or standards that they couldn't, expectations and judgments that were hard to meet, might bring that to their interpretation of religion or spirituality. And of course, we've seen this historically where there's religious wars where people are killed for not, you know, saying they have a certain faith. So we bring our psychology to our spirituality or our religion as well. And I think that's still the piece that I think needs healing for a lot of people. Is our relationship to our religion and what it teaches or our spiritual practice, is it a healthy one? Are we using God to then be the judgmental parent? Or is God loving and awakening our essence inside of us?
I think that's so well put, Phyllis, and thank you for saying that because the way I grew up, religion was in that box of stuff I was handed that here's what you have to believe,
Right.
and it never resonated with me. But I was scared to not believe it because that might mean I go to hell. And
Mm,
so that whole sort of guilt and fear and all of those things was something that I needed to get over. And what I did at some point in my 20s and 30s, and I still do it, it'll never end. But I took the pieces of what I deem to be true in my life at any given time, and I put them out on a table, and I look at them, and I say, okay, what's working and what's not.
right.
And I at some point I had to jettison the religion stuff, and that doesn't mean I love the Bible. I love the Bible because it has so many lessons and wonderful things that are spoken about in parables and metaphors and just, beautiful writing and history and all kinds of great things. But I don't look at it from a religious perspective.
Right.
One of my favorite things about oh, actually, it brings up two stories, but one of my favorite things about exploring certain things about the Bible is the most oft used phrase in the Bible is "fear not" or "be not afraid."
Mm, mm,
So what does that mean, right? It is not designed to do what sometimes religion can do, which is make us feel guilt and fear.
right. Right.
And that's my belief. I'll just tell a quick little story about Joseph Campbell's one of my favorite authors, and I just think his stuff is beautiful, and it just hits me. But he said he told the story of a young Hindu student who came to America, and he wanted to learn about the Western culture, and he started to try to learn about the Western culture by saying, I'm going to read the Bible, and so he read the Bible cover to cover, and
Mm,
Joseph Campbell said, "Well, what do you think?" And he said, "Well, I read it cover to cover, but I can't find any religion in it." And
interesting.
I thought that was a really cool thing because that's how I look at it. I would look at it more like it's a guide as opposed to if you don't believe this, you're in big trouble, kind of thing.
Right. And I would say that's the psychological piece. That's imposing a whole world of judgment and shame and blame and, you know, punishment and reward onto something that essentially isn't that. And I think we really suffer from that. That's my view anyway. Um, and, having been brought up Jewish, um, I had no relationship to Jesus or Christianity or any of that. I knew a little bit about it because we're all exposed to that in the world, but I'd never read the New Testament or anything like that. And in the process of my making this divine connection, a lot came to me about Jesus and John the Baptist. And these things just became part of my world organically from within. And so, I'm grateful for that, because the way I grew up was like, Jesus was like not part of our world. Um,
Right.
and it's really the Christ consciousness, that I think is what this is about. I think this is what this is about. We call it that, but it's a certain evolution of consciousness.
Absolutely couldn't agree more. Yeah. Another one of my favorite authors is Emmett Fox. And the first book I was given by my mentor when I was 19 years old was a book called The 10 Commandments by Emmett Fox. And it blew my mind because it was different than anything I had ever heard. And, going to church every Sunday and learning about, I was Lutheran, and hearing about all that stuff and just unbelievable. But it talked about the Christ consciousness. It talked about different ways to look at, like the 10 Commandments, that people are at different places in their soul consciousness, and thou shalt not kill might mean don't kill anybody over here, but it also, to this person, it might mean, don't talk bad behind someone's back, that sort of thing. So different levels of understanding. And I thought that was just the most beautiful thing. One last thing, and just because it keeps coming to me, and I need to ask, or at least say, tell me about faith.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. And I would say I'm not a master at faith. I think faith is something that I'm learning and probably will be learning for the rest of my life, because coming out of like the trauma of my childhood where it was a dark place. And a lot of the way that I experienced it was self-criticism and feeling like I was a flawed person and that I wasn't lovable or there was something just wrong with me. And so faith seemed very far away. How do you believe, something is there to help you? Or how do you believe life could get better? Or how do you believe that you could evolve out of the stuck places or was in? And faith was not something that I learned growing up in the Jewish religion, although it may be there for many people, but it certainly wasn't something I learned. So it's been something I've been learning, and I think it's a very powerful, very powerful. Do I really trust and believe, I would say it this way, in my soul, which is my connection to the divine? And that's, instead of like a priest being my bridge to the divine, my soul is my bridge to the divine. And so it's putting my faith over and over again. Again, it's not a one and done in my highest self. And that's the way I relate to it today.
That's great. No, I love it. And I I have had a interesting relationship with faith, but for a long time I have felt like I'm being led. And the only way that I can discover that I'm being led is by looking, hindsight's 2020, right? Look back and say, oh, okay, that equaled that, that equaled that. It moved me here. I had no idea. I'm not in control. So something else is, I don't know what is. I call it God, but whatever it is, I don't think God cares how we refer to that power. But something that Joseph Campbell said that I heard very recently that really secured something for me is he said, he was asked by a priest about faith, and he
Mhm.
said to the priest, well, I don't need faith. I have experience. And I think
Interesting.
that was a pretty profound way to look at it, because that can go pretty deep. But how can I have faith unless I have experience, right? It's I don't think it's something that just shows up. I don't think it's something like, oh, I'm 12 years old and everything's, falling apart around me. Let's have faith. It has to do with a different probably story than that. So, Phyllis, I have absolutely loved our conversation, and thank you for sharing all of your thoughts and wisdom. Is there anything else you would like to tell us about your books? As soon as we get off, I'm buying America in Therapy. I can't wait
Great,
to read that.
great.
Quite honestly, yeah, that's exciting. But anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, just I love people to check out the things that I've written because, my heart and soul is in them. And it's my way of wanting to share what's been shared with me, honestly. So my first two books are really about my own healing journey, A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire, and the divine messages that I received from the very beginning. And again, it's not complete, but it's the first part of that. And I think they're pretty powerful. And then my latest book, American Therapy, you can see, on the screen, and you can find me on social media. I have a website. There's a lot of material on my website. I have other, recordings of interviews I've done. I have blogs that I've written. You can contact me through my website. I have some free offerings on conflict resolution that you can get through contacting me on my website. I'm on all the social media. I'd love to converse with anybody who's interested in having a conversation. Yeah, so that's really what I want to share, and I guess maybe on a more level of what we've been talking about. I just want to share that it's just such a joy to meet you and to be with a like-minded soul and share on this level, and know that we're not alone in this. You know, and so I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate the opportunity of talking with you today.
Thank you, Phyllis. And likewise, I very much appreciate you as well, and what you shared, and just your being is it just resonates. It just
Mm,
resonates with me. And I've spoken with a lot of authors, over time, and very few make me want to go buy their books. Um, and not because of anything other than just maybe it doesn't quite resonate with me. And this I'm sure America in Therapy isn't going to be the only book of yours that I read, but the good news is we're going on vacation in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to spend 30 days
great,
reading and
great,
hanging out.
great.
So thank you very much. Appreciate everything, and the
Thank
time,
you.
and the wisdom, and we will catch up, I'm sure, in the future.
And one last word. Your title, "When We Stop Fighting, the Fighting Stops," that could be the title of my book. So
Wow,
we're
cool.
we're and I think you'll see when you read it that we're very aligned. So thank you
Very,
so much. Thank you. Thank
very
you.
cool. Thank you, Phyllis.
All right. Bye.
If you've enjoyed When I Stop Fighting the podcast, please check out my books and my journals on my website, daryldittmer.com. Enjoy a 15% discount by using the code PODCAST, DARYLDITTMER.com. Thanks again.